Hi, I'm Sheri DeMaris. Welcome to Macro Magic, and I have with me a very knowledgeable person about stress and brain health, Michael Thomas, from Holistic Health.
Holistic fitness lifestyle.
Fitness lifestyle, sorry.
It's okay.
And I'm very happy to have him today. He's going to teach us all about stress, about the brain and how it works, and how you can look at your life and figure out how you feel and get more in touch with your emotions and boost your brain health. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Sheri. It's my pleasure to be here.
Oh, great. And do you want to tell me a little bit about stress? We've been talking a lot about all the work that you do, and it's fascinating.
Thank you. So the stress response is normal to the human experience, right? But it's also normal to all of the other organisms on our planet in some way, shape, or form. We just have a more complex version of it. So we have this experience of stress as words, describing things like anxiety or tension in the body or feeling disconnected. You know, these are all words that we use. They're labels that are more complex than an animal would experience it. But yet, underneath the surface, we're experiencing the same thing that animals do. And it's important to calm that and honor the animal inside that actually is trying to keep us safe. It allows us to survive. And when we do that, it's more calm on the inside of our bodies and our minds. And it allows us to thrive because we are better when our stress system is in balance, when we are able to complete a cycle, what's called the arousal cycle in the body. And that means when we get a cue, a trigger that stresses us out, let's say it's a mean comment on Facebook or YouTube, or someone's actually holding us up at gunpoint, or God forbid, we're in a situation where there's a tiger chasing us. This is a universal human experience. Obviously, we're going to go into a fight-flight response. And if we can't manage that, if we can't get away or we can't fight, then we find ourselves in a position of what's called a freeze or collapse. It's immobilization. And this has us be unaware of our emotions and our sensations, which is adaptive. God forbid we're actually in a situation where we were being mauled by a tiger. We don't feel it. Okay, so this applies to everyday experiences like being on social media, where our primal brain is responding as if we're in that experience in terms of the stress response. It's not as extreme, but it still turns off our capacity to thrive, to use our cerebral cortex and be as sophisticated humans as we would be if we were balanced.
And people generally feel this. I mean, they numb themselves out with lots of sugar and coffee. They go to work and they feel like it's the same old day every day. And I think they click off from their body. So the sensations in the body are going on and they're not really listening to what the body's going through. It could be a recent death. It could be a traumatic, mother-child experience. It could be anything related to your day-to-day experience that goes into that stress mode. But I think a lot of people aren't really aware that they're still in the stress mode, and the stress mode is starting to wear their body down and make it less productive.
Yes, we think of the natural aging process as for example, you could think about a baby that is so resilient. When they learn to walk and run and they fall, my dad used to joke with me, it sounds like a puddle splashing, because they're so resilient and there's so much elasticity. As they hit the ground, they're fine. Oh, whoopsie daisy, right? But over time we get more brittle. And there is less elasticity in the tissues, that's true. But what's also happening is, as we experience stress responses, when we have negative emotions, that is when our needs are not met, and so our body is stressed, letting us know that we have a need to meet. What happens is we store that in the body unless we learn to release it. And our culture has conditioned us in unconscious ways, it's not on purpose, to hold that stress in our bodies rather than release it, which we would naturally do. It's a natural thing to release that tension that's held in the body because it's completing what's called an arousal cycle. And when we have chronic stress or trauma, which is actually the same thing, just on a different end of the scale.
Yeah, and I didn't realize that trauma is just deep stress.
Yeah, the body will store it in the tissues until it's released, unless we block it. And this is something that happens. Children, when they're cold, for example, or they're scared, they just allow it to happen, right? But adults have a different response. We're conditioned, we learn to think that vulnerability is a weakness, that experiencing our feelings fully is somehow a flaw, and so we stop it. Oh, get it together, right? We stop the shaking. And that shaking response is actually our body releasing tension energy.
Wow.
So
Wow.
this
I know that even with, we were talking before the show, if you're taking care of an elderly relative, for a couple years, which many of us do at our age, and you're thinking everything's okay, I feel okay, but I'm in the hospital taking care of this person all the time. And all of a sudden we start slowing down, or we become more rigid in our thinking, or we become more traumatized by little things. And then you realize this stress is building up.
Indeed.
And it's not releasing out of your body.
And this brings up a really important point, especially a close family member, because our relationships are so much more powerful in terms of how our nervous systems are regulated than we can possibly accomplish on our own. Dr. Bruce Perry talks about this concept of the way that we evolved as human beings. We were in a tribal setting for most of our human history, and so in that experience, 40 adults per child was average. We had so many mentors, so many people to what's called mirroring. We have these neurons in our medial prefrontal cortex, where the third eye would be, that actually mirrors people's gestures, postures, facial expressions, tone of voice. That's how our brain develops. And based on how we develop early on, that will change how we automatically respond on a primal level to one another. And so our stress response is unconscious based on our relationships mostly.
And you were talking about how important it is. We all think that we're fine being alone, being separate, living, alone and existing day to day alone, but we're not. We need other people for that specific reason.
We absolutely do. It's an unfortunate common belief that we share in this culture, that we need to be independent of one another. Just think, this is something I'm taking from Dr. Bruce Perry. I love this. The American dream of having our own car and our own house and our own room, and then eventually our own screen in our own room. It's this this dream of independence, which is actually a bit what a psychologist would call dissociated. It is disconnecting from our need for one another. And it's nothing bad or wrong. It just happens to be because of how little attunement we had from parental caregivers, not because it was their fault, but because there are less resources available in a less of a tribal setting. We find ourselves wanting to be alone. And it's not because we don't need people. It's because it was so painful not to have that experience that allows us to develop properly, that we actually push people away. And we don't know that we're pushing people away, and that it's because we're terrified of what, on a body level, without language, before we could develop any memory to really recognize this, we learned that it wasn't safe to be connected with people. So this is a commonly shared cultural experience because of how it's set up now. We've invented ourselves beyond our evolutionary capacity to adapt. We can't adapt that fast. It's only been the last 10,000 years, roughly, compared to a couple 100,000 years that we've been around and evolved this way to need one another. So, as you were saying before about when we take care of one another, and it can bring up tension in our bodies and tax us, something called compassion fatigue, that has us take on the experience of the people we're connected with. If they're experiencing trauma or chronic stress, we mirror that with our mirror neurons, just like when we were developing. And so
you're picking up the people's energy all the time.
Exactly. Quite literally, the sound wave energy, the light photons, that energy, our brain processes it, and we feel into how we experience our own sensations based on what their body language is doing. And we feel into their experience.
Oh, wow. So if you're empathetic and caring, You're basically stressed the entire time.
Yeah, well, that is absolutely how the catalyst starts. And if we can bring up the graphic of the what's called the polyvagal curve, it shows a bell curve about that demonstrates the whole of human experience. It's really all of what we experience as human beings. At the bottom of this chart, it shows social engagement. That is, when we feel safe and we're regulated, we can connect with one another. We can read each other's body language cues. Whereas when we get a trigger and we experience stress, for example, taking care of a family member, right? That experience has us mirror what they're experiencing so we can feel into and empathize with them. And that's good because we can attune to them, but then our bodies begin to take that on. So if we don't have a way of releasing that and regulating ourselves and helping them to do the same, what we do is we end up in this upward spiral in terms of stress. And we basically create stress for one another. Now, if we go too high, then we go into that freeze response, which is just not feeling. It's adaptive. We don't have to feel the pain of the stress, but it is stored in the body. And the key is when we experience that stress, it's not bad to be open and experience that. Is good because we connect with one another. But we need to use the tools of self-regulation, of noticing our breath and what our bodies are sensing and how we move to navigate releasing that.
Yes.
And it's our natural birthright. We are naturally capable of this when we get out of the way with our minds.
Yes.
And feel our bodies.
And I'm so curious to learn these methods. And I know after commercial break, we're going to come back and talk to you more about, okay, we've got this stress. Now, how do we get in touch with it and release it in various ways? And I know that you have so many great techniques you want to share with us.
I'm very excited to share that.
But what does it take to strengthen our service members? What does it take to let them know that we stand behind them, wherever they are? What does it take to bridge the distance and keep them connected to family, home, and country? And what does it take to prepare them for their future when their service to the nation is complete? What does it take to strengthen our service members so they can be the greatest force for good in the world? It takes a force. Be a force behind the forces. Share a message today at force.uso.org.
I want to be a contender. I want a warm belly to sleep on.
A big house.
How do I look? Do I look good?
I want to play hard.
My nails done once a month.
I want.
I want a home. I just want a home. I want someone to love.
Last year, more than 30,000 companion animals came to us without homes. 20,000 of them were felines. Let's make some homes together.
Add us on social media to watch bloopers, behind-the-scenes footage, previews, and more.
Well, the interesting thing about when I first began the TRE process is that I noticed that I felt a lot more calm, but with that came a deepened awareness. I was able to feel more into my body, deeper and deeper layers. So in the beginning of the becoming a provider in TRE, the process, as you know, I wrote journal entries, and I must have 300 journal entries, all fine-tuning the sensory experience that just got so deep so quickly. It's why I call TRE mindfulness on steroids. It took my practice to a whole other level that I could not have imagined before practicing. And I mean within a month, I had progress that I hadn't experienced in 10 years of mindfulness practice.
Hi, we're back with Michael Thomas, and we're talking about stress and how the body stores it, especially when you're in a high stressful situation for a long period of time. And we're now going to talk about some ways to release that stress.
Yes, so if it's all right with you, I'd like to take you and the audience here through a brief guided experience. And so I'd like to think about the tools to navigate this with sort of a map and a metaphor. The map being, let's say, away from you and toward you is what I would call the vector of breathing. So on one end of the spectrum, there's chaotic breathing, and on the other end over here, it's more held and rigid, right? And somewhere in between is allowing the breath to be what it is and some sort of balance. And then the vector that goes across would be more like movement. And the movement that we experience allows us to sense more. And the breathing allows us to feel more of what those sensory experiences are, deepening that process, right? And the vertical vector would be like the sensory experience. And we want to, rather than thinking about sensing, which might be up here in our heads, ground it in the experience of feeling while we breathe and while we move. And so what I'd like you to do is, if you're comfortable, close your eyes and tune into what your breathing is doing naturally. Notice the sensations in and out of your nostrils, perhaps, or in and out of your throat. Perhaps the chest rising and falling.
Barely breathing.
And accepting whatever it is, just noticing and observing it. That's wonderful. Maybe your belly going out and in. Maybe it's the whole body breathing, or just the sensation that there's cool air going in or warm coming out. And as you notice that breath flowing in and out, you might notice other sensations in the body. For example, the soles of your feet, or some sensations in your facial muscles, maybe your jaw or behind your eyes, maybe in your belly or your chest, or in your muscles, or deep in your bones. As you breathe in and out, imagine that as you inhale, you're inhaling awareness into your body. And with your mind's eye, your imagination, imagine as you exhale, you let whatever you notice flow back out through your legs and out your feet into the earth. It's like a reset. On the inhale again, allow yourself to fill with awareness. And as you exhale, allow it to flow down through you, through your legs, out your feet, and into the earth again. Every breath is a new moment of awareness inhaling. Every exhale is an opportunity to let those sensations go and breathe in new awareness again. And so I've given you approximately 10 breaths if they're nice and slow. The number is not important. And as you come back into the room and notice what you're aware of in your body now, you're welcome to open your eyes if you haven't done so already. See if you notice anything different in your body.
Totally.
Any changes in temperature, expansive feelings, contractive feelings. This is navigating the map of your human experience. Your nervous system is attuning to your awareness. Your brain literally fires differently based on where you focus your attention. So if we're in our minds and we're not focused on our bodies, we have what's called the default mode network in the centralized networks of the brain. And when those are firing too much, it's not bad to think, it's too much thinking when we're not connected with our bodies that has us activate this default mode network too much. And that's where we become hypervigilant. Oh, what did I say? Was it okay? What do they think of me? Maybe we judge someone else. These are all survival responses, actually, that show up in thinking and emotions. And if we go down to the root of that, into the sensation, we can bypass the clutter of the mind and allow more lateralized networks to activate just by noticing sensations like we did in that exercise. The breathing, noticing different parts of the body, allowing awareness, and letting go each exhale so that we can have a new moment, new awareness. It's in Buddhism, they call it the beginner's mind. Always seeing things through new eyes. It allows us to experience the body, and as we do this, it naturally starts to calm us. Now, these things take time and practice, and so there are a lot of other tools that I use to speed up that awareness process, like you saw in that clip of TRE, which drastically improves your ability to connect to that awareness. Because what happens is that shaking response starts in the psoas muscle. It's a muscle deep underneath the internal organs, behind the internal organs, in front of the spine. and it flexes our hips, it tilts them, stabilizes us. But more importantly, in this conversation, it stores stress energy that we don't release.
Oh, wow.
Think about the fetal position. That's that muscle contracting and pulling
Oh,
us in to protect
wow.
the internal organs, and we shrug up and protect the neck. Notice at the end of a long day, you have tension in your neck. That's a survival response. We're surviving the stress that we perceive, that our bodies perceive. It's not something we think about like, oh, I had a stressful day at work, I'm glad I escaped that tiger. It's not what we consciously think. It's an unconscious process. So a tool like TRE helps us to naturally allow our bodies to complete what's called an arousal cycle. The increased stress response in neurology is called arousal, and go from that middle part of that bell curve that we were looking at, and the top even, where we're shut down, and allow it to, what I call, melt the iceberg of the unconscious.
Oh, wow.
Very, very slowly. If we do it too quickly, it's kind of like melting an iceberg, with a blowtorch. We're going to flood, right? Too much water is released, so to speak. It's the body releasing too much tension too quickly, and we actually dysregulate. So it needs to be slow, kind of like a heating pad. And then, in this metaphor, let's play with it a little bit. Let's say you actually need to drink the water. You don't want to choke on it, right? So you want to make sure that it's just enough. So as you release in TRE, for example, it allows you to feel that comfort in your body as the shaking happens. And then you know that you're in a regulated response and it's continuing to calm your system. So that's one of many tools that I use.
It's interesting because yoga nidra, I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's a yoga technique where you lay down and you feel your toes, then you feel your ankles, you feel each part of your body. It's very similar to that.
Yes.
And the deep breathing and the releasing of the breath. Because I know whenever you hold your breath, you're holding tension in. And we tend to do that in a fight-flight response, just hold our breath and not breathe. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's what we're doing with our breathing is a mirror, rather a window into the nervous system.
Oh.
It's showing what's going on. So the fight-flight response, it's mobilizing us to move and use our muscles. Less blood flow in the organs, which is why when we have chronic stress, we have digestive issues. We can have sexual dysfunction. We have chronic tension because there's so much blood going to the muscles to have us mobilize and get away from the perceived threat. So and when we go all the way to the very top of that bell curve, it's more of a shutdown where we have low heart rate, low blood pressure. We still have tension. It's kind of like the brake and the gas on the car at the same time.
Wow.
We're not actually calm, but it looks that way, which is why the polyvagal curve is so very helpful as a new way of accessing trauma science in a way where we can recognize when someone's in that response where they might look calm. They're not calm if they're in that immobilization response, and we now know that.
Yeah, I just know PTSD or caretaking, like we said, of older relatives. I got to the point taking care of my dad where, you can't digest food anymore, and your body's like continually cold, and you're not breathing, and so I think we all get to that point, the extreme stress point, especially as adults, and not know what to do. So I think this tool is really wonderful, just to sit quietly, get into the body, breathe deeply, and just release that tension. Very, very helpful.
Absolutely. And as you had mentioned before, the changing of the breath pattern, if we think of those vectors of awareness, the sensation, grounding it and allowing the breath to be what it is, and moving, allowing our bodies to move the way it wants to. And that's what you saw in that video of TRE. We're allowing the body to move in a way that, well, it accomplishes two things. One, it helps to calm the system and regulate us so that our mood's balanced, we can focus better, our brain works better, our body works better, our relationships are more attuned. But it also allows us to release tension. It moves through the myofascial chains of the body.
And the blood flow, especially the circulation too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Whereas if we're frozen, we're sort of stuck. Well, you have some graphics. I know that you also teach Tai Chi.
Yes, indeed.
Which is a great tool for students to use. And here you are doing, I guess, one of the poses.
That's right.
And you also teach privately and groups, correct?
Yes. So I teach a group TRE class as well as private, and I teach a group Tai Chi class. And I also do brain health coaching. And so this is a much more specific modality. And because there is a lot to it, it's a whole lifestyle based on your specific brain type. And it's based on the work of the Amen clinics of Dr. Daniel Amen. So when you get the assessment, you can take a look at...
Here are some different brains on...
Yeah, these are all different expressions of the same symptoms, but the brain systems are showing very different patterns in what's called the SPECT scan. It measures blood flow to the brain. So sometimes it's too much activity, sometimes it's too little. And those different patterns require very different treatments. Over the last 25 years, the Amen clinics have come up with these amazing natural as well as psychiatric treatments.
So there's the surface and the active.
This is what healthy brain looks like. The outside surface, the color isn't important on the surface view. It's more to show the texture, it's smooth, and that's a healthy cortex, the human part of us. And more of the primal animal part that runs the show and the stress response is what you see in the blue and red. That's the internal view. And you see lots of red, it's high activity of the cerebellum. That's the back of the brain. They call it, it means mini brain. And it helps us to regulate and communicate with the bigger part of the brain. And as you saw in that graphic there, the front part is more quiet. And when it's really, really high in activity, there's probably anxiety or mood dysregulation. There are all sorts of different things that can show up. But again, this is all a stress response that shows up in unique ways.
And it's so fascinating. Your work is so fascinating because you can actually feel, or I can feel, when you go to work and you're real busy and you're real caring about how everybody's feeling in the office, and you actually feel the energy coming off your head, the front of your brain, worry, 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 like nothing seems to get done, or, all these forward-thinking thoughts. So, and once you relax and breathe and get into the body, that energy sort of pulls back and settles. So you can actually feel it, I think.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is fun. So we got to wrap up, but how do viewers get in touch with you if they want a class, private or a group, or if they want a session? How can they reach you?
You can reach me by my phone or email, but the most effective way to get in touch with me and also look at some of the services that are listed there is on holisticfitnesslifestyle.com and also at aramidwellness.com, the wellness center where I teach the classes.
Do you want to spell Aramid for our viewers?
AIRMID, wellness.com. So it's actually a Gaelic name.
Michael, it's been great having you. I'm going to go home and practice my deep breathing.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
And I think your work is really fascinating, especially for PTSD, as well as people, in everyday life that are feeling stressed, to learn more about their brain and how they can function better and actually become more whole and more integrated and not, be in a fight-flight mode all the time.
Yes, yeah, that seems to be the game these days, yes.
Yes, so thanks for joining us. And we look forward to working with you and staying connected. Do you just want to mention your website again?
Sure. It's holisticfitnesslifestyle.com and aramidwellness.com, AIRMID wellness.com.
Thanks.